People keep on asking me, how is it possible that Bitcoin keeps on going up over time? In 2019, the price was 3K. At the end of that cycle in 2021, the price was 69K. We had a big pullback over the bear market to about 15.8, and now we're already back up at about 52K. Now, how does this keep on happening? So the answer is actually this guy right here. And what this is the US dollar and all other fiat currencies around the world, including the Australian dollar, the British pound, Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, etc. List goes on. They're all being deflated over time. And the problem is that they're constantly printing more and more of these fiat currencies to add stimulus to economies, to keep the economy growing, to keep GDP growing. And then it makes it easier for them to pay off the debt that they owe for borrowing and then spending money through government programs. Now we can see here that the value of the dollar has actually depreciated or been inflated away about 99% over the last 100 years. Now, if we contrast this to Bitcoin, we can see here total ever Bitcoins to be produced is 21 million, right? That means that in the code of Bitcoin, when Satoshi created, in all his genius, he put a hard cap on the number of Bitcoins that could ever be created. This was to create scarcity in the asset class, okay? Now, we can look at this here. In total, Bitcoins in current circulation is 19.63 million coins, okay? And what's about to happen is something called the Bitcoin halving. Now, what is the Bitcoin halving? The Bitcoin halving is when the amount of Bitcoin that's distributed by the algorithm to the miners who process the Bitcoin blockchain network every 10 minutes. They get a reward, and it's currently 6.25 Bitcoin. Now, after the halving, which is going to happen on April 21st, which is about 58 days away from right now, that's going to get cut in half down to 3.125 Bitcoin per 10 minutes. So this is going to drastically lower the amount of Bitcoin circulating as supply in the market. And the price of a currency is always going to be determined, and any asset, I should say, not just a currency, is going to be determined by the amount of supply versus the amount of demand. So Bitcoin is literally programmed to go up over time because there's constantly supply cuts to the market. Now, the miners are actually the biggest sellers in the market. And the reason why the market always pumps after the halving every single time is because the miners stop selling when the price is actually costing them more to mine one Bitcoin than they are making profit from it. So when they're mining at a loss, they will stop selling and they will stockpile that Bitcoin. And because they're the biggest seller in the market, they're the number one supply in the marketplace, they take that supply away while the demand is still the same. What happens? The price goes up until people decide to start selling again, until the miners are back in profit and they want to start selling again. Now, this guy right here, his name is Michael Saylor. He's a pretty smart guy. He runs a company called MicroStrategy, and they're basically like a competitor to IBM and Microsoft. They do infrastructure, information systems and stuff like that for big companies. And he decided about 4 years ago that instead of holding fiat money, US dollars, in their bank account for all the profits that the company makes on their balance sheet, that instead of holding those US dollars, they were going to buy Bitcoin and hold Bitcoin as their balance sheet. And over the last 4 years, they've just consistently been buying every single month, and everybody gave them shit. Everybody picked on them. And he actually ran seminars for other CEOs to explain to them the reasons why they're doing this and why it's a better option to hold Bitcoin as your balance sheet rather than US dollars. Of course, no other CEO on the planet would dare do it, apart from Elon Musk for a little bit, because he's a bit of a risk taker as well. And it's also his company. Companies that are managed by guys that wear suits that are, C-suite executives versus the entrepreneurial types that actually built those companies are two completely different ball games. And to give you one thing, the suits are never going to take any risks, like holding something radical like Bitcoin on the balance sheet instead of US dollars, because if something goes wrong, that's the end of their life as a career CEO. But Michael Saylor, he's the entrepreneur that started MicroStrategy, and so is Elon Musk. So they have a lot more freedom to do whatever the fuck they want. So basically, MicroStrategy has been buying every single month, instead of holding US dollars, they've been buying Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And look at this. Just the other day, on the 15th of February, they hit over $4 billion in profit just from holding Bitcoin as their profit on their balance sheet instead of holding US dollars. They've also been doing a few other things, like they borrowed against the Bitcoin that they currently had to increase their holdings when the market was low. So it's fair enough to say he knows exactly what he's doing. And everyone laughed at him, but now, just at the start of this bull market, he's already up 4 billion. Not a bad play. Now, the reason why he did this is because he says that the US dollar loses between 7 on a good year and 15% on a bad year if you're just holding it in your bank account. So that means over about a decade, you're going to lose pretty much 99% of the purchasing power of your money if you're holding it in dollars in your bank account. But Bitcoin increases on average about 250% across its last 14 years of its lifespan per year. So it was pretty much a no-brainer for him. Why would you hold something that's losing value when you can hold something that's increasing in value? Now this here is the chart of the Federal Reserve balance sheet. And basically it shows us how much money the US government owes the Federal Reserve. Now we can see here there was quite a nice run up until 2008, and then there was a massive increase. And this was because of the 2008 global financial crisis and the bailout of the banks that the Obama administration did. And then for the next pretty much decade, they were slowly increasing it, and it ran all the way up to about 4.5 trillion, okay? So it's quite a big increase from pretty much 1 trillion. It was about 800 billion. And then, about 7 years later, 8 years later, we're at 4.5 trillion. But nothing is more extreme as when we had COVID. We can see just down here this huge jump where we go from $4 trillion to around $7 trillion almost overnight. And that happened because they decided to shut down the economy and do huge stimulus programs. They also gave $2 trillion straight to BlackRock and Larry Fink to basically stop the stock market from dumping. Now, this is where it starts to get really interesting. We can see this rest of the run up with the Biden administration all the way up until about $9 trillion. It topped out about $9 trillion, and then we can see that they've actually been pretty good over the last year and a half, 2 years, since around the end of 2021. And they've actually managed to bring it back from 9 trillion all the way down to about 7.5 trillion. But there's a catch. So here's the catch. Just when you thought the government was doing the responsible thing, and they were bringing down the balance sheet and they were looking after the debt and trying to slow down inflation and all those good things, what do we have here? Now, this is the reverse repo repurchasing program. You can see at the top there, it topped out about $2.4 trillion. So basically, this is a place where banks can put their money and they get a payout from the government. We don't need to get into details on this. The important thing here is, while the Federal Reserve balance sheet has actually been going down, this has been going down from about 2.4 trillion down to about 500 billion. So that means that the government has taken about $2 trillion out of the reverse repo, put it into the TGA, and they've just been supplementing the money that's been getting taken out of QT from the Federal Reserve balance sheet. They've just been supplementing it with the money coming out of the reverse repo. And actually, they've actually managed to increase the amount of money that they've been spending into the economy. Now, what does that mean? So, if the government can't stop spending money when inflation is at 40-year highs and there's massive problems with inflation, and that's the main talking point of everybody in the news, and all the political pressure is all on about bringing inflation down, if they're still adding liquidity into the economy while all of that's going on, they're never going to stop. And that is why Bitcoin will continue on its path, on its rhyme and rhythm, in its cycles, increasing after the halving, then having a pullback, and then probably increasing after the halving again. And I've got one last chart if you don't believe. Now, this chart here shows us the US dollar liquidity in the green line and the price of Bitcoin in the orange line. Now, you can see that they are almost exactly the same chart. So guys, I can't make this any more clear. Bitcoin will continue to go up because the most important thing in the price of all risk assets, and especially Bitcoin, it's super sensitive to this, is liquidity in the marketplace. And the US government is addicted to injecting liquidity into the economy. And that's it.